But there was a there was an article that was published recently on RT, and it's about really why the Russians should not be trusting the Americans, even though the Americans are now taking this really soft approach towards Russia. And it says here, when Vladimir Putin launched Russia's military operation in February 2022, he made it clear that the conflict was not merely about Ukraine. It was about Moscow's broader struggle against the entire so-called Western Bloc, shaped in the image of the United States. So the war in Ukraine was a war on NATO. That's just the bottom line. And that means the United States. It was a war of defiance against American power. And remember what Donald Trump said. He said that he would dismantle BRICS, which is the economic bloc of Russia. So Trump, like I said, is being very, very Machiavellian. That's what Trump is doing. And as I've said numerous times, Russia is the winner, Ukraine is the loser, therefore NATO is the loser. NATO is in the disadvantageous position. So it says here that the return of Donald Trump to the White House has shaken the transatlantic alliance. Trump's America is no longer playing by the old rules. This is true. This is true. We are seeing the post-World War II system that was established after World War II by the Allies crumbling before our eyes. The post-World War II system that we've become so accustomed to, the system that was established by the United States, is crumbling. And Donald Trump is accelerating that dismantling, or this dismantling, of the post-World War II order. And that's why you see Donald Trump telling the Europeans to defend themselves, to spend money on their own defense, and to stop being so dependent on the United States. This is the dismantling of the post-World War II era. So it says here that America is no longer playing by the old rules. It is dismantling decades-old structures that defined Western dominance. His aggressive rhetoric against Western Europe, his attacks on NATO, and his open disdain for Ukraine have left European leaders scrambling. Some analysts, such as Stefan Walt, believe that America's allies will eventually unite against Trump's unpredictability. And I think this is true. We see, like I've said many times, we now see the Europeans really working to rearm themselves because they don't want to be dependent on America's military for defense. This is only accelerating German militarism. And that's why we see the rise of the most militarist party in Germany, the AfD. We see how the AfD is now the second most powerful party in Germany, and they are the most militarist party. Why is that? It's no coincidence that America is pushing for German militarism while at the same time supporting the most militarist party in Germany. That's not a coincidence. They're supporting the most militarist party in Germany because they want to revive German militarism, because they want to create a German militarist power in Europe to then sick it on the Russians. This is about using the Germans as a proxy against the Russians. So they said, okay, we tried to use the Ukrainians and that didn't work. So what are we going to do? How about we get the meanest dog on the block, historically speaking, the Germans, the biggest enemy of the Russians, the only country in history that really, really proved to be a serious threat to Russia, Germany. And the Germans fought the Russians in World War I, fought the Russians in World War II. They were close to defeating the Russians in both of those wars. So historically speaking, the Germans have been the biggest threat to the Russians. And so the Americans have said, okay, let's get the biggest dog, the meanest dog on the block, the most anti-Russian country on the block, and sick them on the Russians. So it says here that, let me just lower myself a little bit. Putin, however, maintains that these European leaders will ultimately What is this? Go away. Will ultimately stand at their master's feet and wag their tails, regardless of their grievances. The question is, what does this shifting dynamic mean for Russia? Trump's radical foreign policy moves have stunned observers. The American president has openly dismissed Ukraine, reducing it to a burden that Washington should no longer carry. Now, remember I was talking to you guys about this stuff months and months ago, and I said that the Americans see Ukraine as just a burden, and they want to shift that burden onto the shoulders of the Europeans. Remember when I said that? I said this. I've said this many, many times. And I said this right at the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I said this is going to lead to the rise of Germany. In fact, even before the Russians invaded Ukraine, I talked about how the war in the Donbass was being used by the Germans to justify reviving German militarism. So this has been going on for years, and it's only making itself clearer and clearer as time goes on. As time goes on. Do you think Trump could take over Gaza and rebuild it as Trump Gaza? I'm sure he could. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but yeah, I'm sure he could. I mean, something like that wouldn't be too difficult for the United States. Only the biggest difficulty would be dealing with insurgents, and in that case, it would be like Iraq. So it says here that Trump's disdain for Ukraine is not driven by geopolitical strategy, but by domestic calculations. His focus is China, not Eastern Europe. Remember, I said this. I told you guys this, 2 years ago or something? I said, Trump's focus is China. China. Trump's focus is China. And so they're going to say, okay, Europe, Germans, you guys deal with Ukraine. We're going to focus on China. China. That's our priority. China is our big focus. That's it. That's what this is about. And it says here, he wants to redirect American attention to trade imbalances, the Arctic, Latin America. And why does he want to focus on the Arctic? Something to do with rivaling the Russians. Latin America and the Indo-Pacific. Why the Indo-Pacific? Oh, China. And what does that involve? What is that going to involve, focusing on the Indo-Pacific? Arming Japan. Further arming the Japanese, to use the Japanese as a proxy against the Chinese. And this is why I said months ago, I said my theory about NATO's policy for China is that they're going to try to cause an uprising in the Xinjiang province amongst the Uyghur Muslims, to get the Uyghur Muslims to revolt against the Chinese government, to destabilize China in the West, and also to use the Japanese as a proxy against China in the East. And if they succeed in this policy, it would greatly weaken China. And it says here that, yet Ukraine, framed by Joe Biden's administration as the defining battle between good and evil, has become an ideological lightning rod. The Biden White House staked everything on a victory over Russia. Trump, in typical fashion, seeks to destroy that narrative, turning it inside out. So Trump is using this whole thing to make Biden look like a failure. And this is my prediction. I'm going to say it right now. I think it's going to take a long-ass time for the Democrats to recover from this. I really do. I think that the next president is going to be a Republican. I could be wrong. You know, one day I could have egg in my face in the future. But I believe that the next president after Trump is going to be a Republican. And I think it's going to take years for the Democrats to recover from their devastating loss against Trump. Because one of the main reasons why the Democrats lost was because they kept pushing wokeism and transgender ideology. And so the Democrats are going to have to completely reform themselves. The problem is, if the Democrats start talking like Donald Trump to get votes, people are just going to say, well, you're just pretending to be a Republican to get my votes, so we don't believe you. You're totally fake. So even if the Democrats try to act like Trump, it's still going to take them a while to beat the MAGA movement and to recover and to rehabilitate themselves from their devastating loss. The Democrats are going to have to throw the trans people under the bus. That's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to throw transgenderism under the bus and try to pretend that they never supported transgenderism in the first place. And people are just going to say, You're the party of transgenderism. You tried to push that shit on us in the past, and now you're acting like a populist. Now you're acting like Donald Trump, and we're not buying it. So it's going to take a while for the Democrats to really recover from what happened to them. It really is. The Democrats really messed up pushing that trans bullshit, and they really messed up just talking about that transgender stuff, and a lot of people hate that stuff, rightfully so. And so Democrats are going to have to go through a full reformation in order to really come back from the loss that they just endured. J.D. Vance will be Trump's successor. I think so, yeah. Ukraine minerals, Greenland minerals, and now the Congo has asked the U.S. to exchange minerals for peacekeeping. There you go. There you go. So it says here, the Trump phenomenon has thrown the Western alliance into turmoil. Western Europe is grappling with its dependence on the United States. Some European leaders talk of strategic autonomy, yet they lack the means to achieve it. Others hope to outlast Trump and return to familiar ground. Ooh, so you see, this is a difficult one because let's say what it's saying here is that you have Europeans who are thinking, okay, well, we'll just endure through Trump's rhetoric and his policies, but then eventually the American people are going to vote for a president who's going to take America back to normalcy. I don't think there's any going back from this. I don't. Once Americans see Trump berating Zelensky and telling him, you're not going to take any more of our tax dollars for this war that you're losing, and once you see Doge just gutting out federal programs and firing all these federal employees, once you see that sort of thing, I don't think there's any going back from this. I think this sort of trend is going to continue. This sort of political activity, or this sort of mentality, this MAGA mentality, is going to continue, and I think it's only going to intensify. Because Americans have always complained about how they vote for a president and they see nothing happening. Oh, we voted for this guy and nothing happened. They voted for Trump and they're seeing something happen. They're seeing people getting fired. They're seeing Trump yelling at Zelensky, saying that we're not going to support this war anymore. You see Donald Trump saying, okay, we're going to impose tariffs on the Canadians and the Mexicans and the Europeans. We see things happening. Donald Trump says, yeah, we're going to change the name from Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And you see it. Boom, it happened. And then Trump said, yeah, we're going to cut off all wasteful spending. And you see America cutting off wasteful spending. You see America going after these spending programs and gutting them and getting rid of them. And you see America firing all these employees, saying, yeah, we're going to fire all these employees because they're a waste of money. It's not worth paying them. They're not really helping us. So Americans are seeing things happening, and almost every day it's like watching reality TV. So there's this constant stimulation, and that brings about a lot of excitement. So I don't think there's any going back from this. I think I think after Trump leaves office, I think people are going to vote for a MAGAist again. They're going to want to see more MAGA because they want to see things happening. So I don't think there's any going back from this. I don't think we're going back to normalcy. I don't think we're just going to return to the normalcy of the post-World War II era. So it says here, Washington's interference in European elections, once a tool of Western hegemony, is now being deployed by Trumpists to push their own agenda. For Trump's allies, the European Union is an extension of Biden's America, and their mission is to dismantle it from within. That's true. That's how they see the European Union. They see the EU as, oh, it's just a bunch of these elites, and they're just thieves and Satanists, and they're like the Tower of Babel, so we have to dismantle them, and we got to destroy globalism because the globalists are evil. If you hear American Christians talking about this, they'll say something like, the EU, man, that's the Tower of Babel, or they'll say, yeah, they're globalists and they're trying to destroy sovereignty. We got to bring back sovereignty. And so because of Alex Jones's decades-long rhetoric against the globalists, A lot of people, I mean, not just because, but partially because of that Alex Jones ideology, a lot of people demonize globalism and they want nationalism. Here's the thing about nationalism. When nationalism is done by a very powerful country, it quickly becomes a globalist power because they start taking other people's countries. They start taking other people's territories. And then they say, okay, we're the new empire. And then you have globalism again. Wow. Wow. Who would have thought, right? This whole thing about dismantling globalism, it's all about just empowering nationalism to create another form of globalism. At least that's what it's going to lead to. I mean, the Germans were nationalists, and then they started stealing other people's territories. Then they became globalists. Didn't take that long. Who's to say that nationalism should stop at just the nation in which that nationalism is being observed? It's like what Erdogan said. He said, Turkey is bigger than Turkey. We don't stop at just Turkey. We're going to keep on going. And that's right. And the Israelis who have been expanding into Syria, I mean, they're pretty nationalistic. They don't give a damn. They're in Syria. So who's to say that nationalism just stops at nationalism? Nationalism starts with egoism and jingoism and all the stuff about pride for one's race. But then eventually it translates into militarism. It escalates into militarism, and that escalates into war, and that escalates into occupying other people's territories, and then that escalates into, well, an empire building. It's the same thing with heretics. You know, heretics will say, oh, the church has too much power. The Roman Catholic Church has too much power. And then so they create their own cult, and then they become powerful, and then they become the very thing that they claimed to have been against. So there you go. That's why I don't really buy into any of this nonsense. It's all bullshit. It's all just a way to cover up for a desire to gain power for oneself and for one's ideology. So it says here, Moscow finds itself ideologically closer to Trump's America than to the liberal EU. That's true, but aligning too closely with Trump carries risks. The upheaval in the United States is not about Russia. It is about America's own identity crisis. Moscow must be careful not to become a pawn in Washington's domestic battles. And again, America doesn't do anything without some kind of gain for the United States. So America is being nice to the Russians. There is an ulterior motive somewhere. There is a motive. And I think the motive is very Machiavellian, as I've said already. And so, yes, they want to make Russia into some pawn of something, some pawn for some kind of cause. And this article is correct. Russia must be careful not to overly trust the Americans. The West is locked in an existential struggle over its future. Russia must recognize that one faction, the Trump administration, has found it useful to engage with Moscow, but only temporarily. And remember, there was a pact, an economic pact that was established between the Third Reich and the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, and that was about commerce between the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. And these two empires were enemies. These two powers were enemies. And the Nazis decided to establish commerce with the Soviet Union because the Germans needed to have the natural resources that that Russia owned. And there was trade between the Nazis and the Soviets. And then eventually what happened? War broke out. So just as the Germans were very Machiavellian when establishing a commercial tie with the Soviets, the Americans are being very Machiavellian. So it says here, historically, Russia has often sought Western recognition, sometimes at its own expense. The perception that Moscow always seeks to be acknowledged by the West persists. If Russia rushes to embrace Trump's overtures while turning its back on its non-Western partners, it will reinforce the stereotype that it craves Western validation above all else. This would be a strategic blunder. Not gonna lie, it's hard to. I knew someone was gonna object to this. It's fine. Objections are fine. Disagreement is fine. Not gonna lie, it's hard to compare Molotov-Ribbentrop with what Trump is doing with Putin now. The Soviets always opposed Nazism, but they had to sign the pact since the Allies didn't want to help the Soviets. But that's not my point. My point wasn't to say that Trump is the same or even similar to the Nazis or Mr. Ribbentrop. That's not what I was arguing. My point was that, as you say here, the Nazis and the Soviets were enemies, and yet there was this commercial deal between them, even though they were enemies. So if we were alive at that time, some people would have thought, wow, some people would be thinking, wow, look, the Nazis and the Soviets are enemies, but here they are trading with each other. Looks like there's some hope for peace. And so we see a similar situation in which we have America saying, hey, let's have some kind of deal with you, Russia, and maybe we can share the minerals in Ukraine. And my point is that it's not going to last. That's my point. It's not going to last because America and Russia are rivals, just like the Soviets and the Nazis were enemies. That's my whole point. Trump, Merz, and the future of the U.S.-German friendship is an interesting article about Germany seeking independence from American power, military independence from American power, which is pretty crazy. Pretty damn crazy given the history of Germany. 2 world wars, and you want to let these people just unleash themselves. It's pretty reckless what's happening. So it says here that there is no new government in Germany quite yet, but after Sunday's election, it's all but certain that Friedrich Merz of the Conservative Christian Democratic Union will be the next chancellor. He, along with the CDU and its Bavarian sister party, CSU, Christian Social Union, will have to find coalition partners to govern. One of the big talking points since the results came out is how Germany and Europe will deal with U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, this is quite shocking. Look what it says here. After his party's victory in the election was confirmed Sunday night, Merz said that he wanted to work on creating unity in Europe as quickly as possible, quote, so that step by step we can achieve independence from the U.S. Now, we can sit here and say, well, this is a brand new phenomenon. This happened because Vance went over there. No. The Germans have been working on this for a very long time. They've been working on this, I want to say, for decades. But they really ramped things up, I want to say, going back to 2015, 16. And they really ramped things up after Brexit. And I remember after Brexit, Angela Merkel after Brexit, the Germans started talking about being having more of a leadership position for Europe's defense. And then in 2017, Angela Merkel said that the days of us relying on the United States or Great Britain are over. She said this. And I think she said the same thing in 2018. And then you had the head of the EU Commission, I want to say back in 2019, Jean-Claude Juncker. Jean-Claude Juncker, back in 2019, did a speech, I want to say in the Belgian parliament, in which he said, or was it the Belgian, or it was in some parliament in Europe, I don't remember, but he made a speech in 2019 in which he said, he said, Europe must eclipse the United States. So this has been going on for a while. This whole sentiment of wanting to be independent of American power has been going on for a long time. And Trump comes along and he adds fuel to the fire and he gives the Germans the green light for what they want. He gives the Germans the green light for what they want. They want to be independent of American power. And so with Biden, the rhetoric was still there. The rhetoric about being independent of American security was there, but it wasn't as intense as it has been under Donald Trump, be it under his first term or be it under this particular term. And so Mr. Merz is saying, step by step, we can achieve independence from the U.S. What the hell is this shit? Go away, freak. Ugh, sick troll. I have been discussing a scenario where the U.S. actually pulls out from Europe with a friend from the Balkans. It's not looking very peaceful. Yep, I see it happening as well. I see this happening as well. And so what's happening is Europe is just continuing with its plan to be independent of American power. That's it. I've been talking about this for every live stream for years now. And I've been doing many videos. I've done many videos on this. I've written many articles on this topic. But you see the plan just unfolding. And Trump is helping them. And I think Trump knows exactly what he's doing. Trump knows exactly what he's doing. How do I know this? Because he said it himself. He said that it is dangerous for Germany to rebuild its military. He said this back in 2023. So why in the hell is he giving the propaganda fodder that the Germans can use to justify being militarily independent? He knows what he's doing, and he knows that what he's doing is very dangerous. That's what makes this whole thing so cynical and dark, really. Look at this guy. This guy looks, ugh. Is something wrong with this guy. I can tell. I can just tell. And so it says here that Merz spoke out after J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference in February, in which the U.S. Vice President said that the biggest threat to Europe did not come from Russia or China, but from within. So Vance was criticizing the mainstream parties in Germany for not working with the AfD and for firewalling the AfD. And it says here, this is really now the change of an era. And he said it. He says it right there. This is the end of an era. Or a change of an era. And he's right. We are going through the biggest zeitgeist shift in our time. And you can feel it. I can literally, I'm like Neo when Neo feels the machines. I can feel it. I just read the news. I see what's happening. I see the videos coming out. I see what people like to watch on YouTube. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, there's a big seismic shift in the zeitgeist. Big seismic shift. And the thing is, if you go onto YouTube, you see so much slop on YouTube. There's so much just garbage on YouTube that people watch. I was looking at this one video and some guy was saying, oh yeah, look, the German nationalists, they're getting more popular. This is great. And look, oh, the media, the mainstream media is saying they're Nazis. Look, this is ridiculous. And this is just that, what I just described to you right now, that is your run-of-the-mill right-wing YouTube channel. Just German nationalism is great, nationalists great, wonderful, globalism bad, so we should support German nationalism. This is awesome. Media is lying. They're all liars. Everything's a lie. And people eat this shit up. They eat this shit up like no one's business. Great stuff. Wonderful. So informative. And none of these videos are informative because they're not shedding light on the darkness that is arising. So we really are going through a change in the era, a change of an era. And he says, if we don't hear the wake-up call now, it might be too late for the entire European Union. And it says here, since taking office on January 20th, Trump has doubled down on his statement that Europeans need to step up their defense funding so they can take care of their own security themselves. The implication is clear. The U.S. won't be protecting you forever. The U.S. won't be protecting you forever. Ooh, I wonder what that means. That means Germany, you better bring back the Reich. Germany, you better bring back the Reich. Better increase military spending. 5% GDP. Oh, and the English are talking they're talking about how, oh, by 2027, our defense spending is going to increase by a few decimals of our GDP. So I think I read somewhere, I think it was something like, I think the British said something like, we're gonna increase our spending by 2027 from 2.3 or something percent of our GDP to 2.5 or 3.5 or something. Like, wow. I think it was from 3 point something to 3 point something else of their GDP. Really? And the Germans are talking about increasing it by 5%. And the Germans are very, very industrial people, very innovative people. You get them on the warpath, it's not going to be pretty. People don't realize this. People don't see it coming. They don't, and they refuse to see it coming. That's what makes it so scary. Is people refuse to see the truth. They do. And you give them the truth, and they're, because they had this tunnel vision, this tunnel vision perspective in which they say, nope, my political football team has to be right. The narrative of my political football team has to be right. Do you know where that got us? That got us to Iraq. That way of thinking got us to Iraq. Because Bush said, well, we have to invade Iraq. It's the war on terror. And if you disagreed, then you somehow were completely void of sympathy for all those Americans who were incinerated in the Twin Towers. How dare you question our grand leader, George Bush? And that way of thinking that is vacuous of being critical towards one's country, that way of thinking that is empty of any sort of vigilance about what your country is doing, led us to the disaster of Iraq, and Iraq led us into the horrors that we are seeing right now. Destabilization in the Middle East, toppling of Bashar al-Assad, which has led to the rise of Turkey. The rise of Turkey is right there. It can be right there, seen in clear view in Syria, right next door to Israel. And now the Israelis are talking about what? They're talking about preparing for a war with Turkey. And all this bullshit, because people refused to question the narrative that the U.S. government was pushing back in the early 2000s, back in 2003. All this bullshit because people were too damn loyal to their political football team. And now we're all suffering from this. And this is why I criticize nationalism. American nationalism is what? American nationalism is basically saying we're going to shove a boot up your ass because it's the American way. That's American nationalism. And people don't want to question the motivations of their country when they are under the spell of their country, under the spell of the nationalism of their country. That's it. That's the bottom line. So nationalism will lead to one's demise. Oh, are you saying you hate your country? I support patriotism. I think patriotism is healthy. Patriotism says, I will defend my country for a good cause. Patriotism says, I want to do something beneficial for my society, for my country. Nationalism is, I will not question the motivations of my country. And when my country does evil, I will make excuses for that evil. And if my country did evils in the past, I will make excuses for those evils, or I will deny that those evils even happened. That's what nationalism entails. So you have to understand the distinction between patriotism and nationalism. And people conflate the two. They think that the two words mean the same thing. They don't. And so people hear nationalism and think it's a good thing. Nationalism is blind faith in your country. That's what nationalism is. It's just blind faith in your country. So people, for some reason, just don't want to see this. And yes, if you are enjoying the live stream, please hit the like button because it does help the channel. So we are going through this mad-ass shift in the Zeitgeist. And we're seeing it. I see it every week. And every live stream, I'm talking about the same thing. But in every live stream, I'm talking about the same thing with new details, new stories that substantiate what I am warning you guys about. And every year I tell myself, Ted, maybe you're overreacting. Ted, maybe you are overthinking this. Ted, maybe you're wrong. And I kind of have a little bit of self-doubt. And I have this every year, and it's not just one moment a year. I'll experience this sort of thing multiple times a year, where I think maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just crazy, maybe I'm just overthinking this, or maybe I'm just over-exaggerating. But what happens every year is an event or a series of events that justifies my prediction and substantiates my claim. I've been telling people for years that German militarism is going to be revived, that there's going to be a German Reich. I've been telling people since 2016 that this is going to be the case. And every year we see more and more new stories that justify my prediction. And now we are seeing other people waking up to this fact. I heard E. Michael Jones saying fascism is coming back. I see Asmund Gold saying that there's going to be another Hitler. And it makes me very happy to see that more and more people are waking up to this reality. It really does, because for a while I thought Am I crazy? Am I imagining things? Am I insane? Am I just a pearl clutcher who is saying that the sky is falling? But no, every year we see new events that take place. I've been saying this since 2016, and every year since 2016, I have been seeing more and more events that further substantiate my claim, that further justify my prediction. And the naysayers are still there, and the naysayers say the same thing. They always say, Ted, you're wrong, it's never going to happen. But yet we continue to see more and more stories that further shed light on what I'm warning about. And you see it right here in the news. There's Germany saying we're entering a new era. There is Mr. Merz saying that we got to be independent of the United States. You are seeing the beginning, gradual stages of the revival of German Reichism. And even if the far right takes over, and I think the far right will eventually take over, they're not going to stop this. They're going to make it worse. That's the thing. The far right, if they take over Germany, and I think they will, they're in second place already, and the AfD has only been around for about 10 years or so, maybe a little bit over 10 years. If they take over, they're going to take this current militarist policy and they're going to drive it to third gear. They're going to amp it up like crazy, and they're really going to intensify it and make it more about fighting for race and nation and blood. And they're going to give it a more metaphysical face. They're going to say it's not about fighting democracy. They're not going to say it's about fighting democracy. They're going to say it's about fighting for our existence as a race. And that entails both physical defense, but it also invokes this idea of defending a metaphysical idea, the metaphysical idea of national identity.